It's supposed to be working. Oh yeah, there
Oh,
we
there you go. Three attendees.
go. Oh,
Seven.
they were waiting.
We're waiting.
We're here chatting.
Sylvia had all the power.
Hi everybody. I hope that you can hear me. Um,
Vanessa says hola.
okay, perfect. So you can hear me. I apologize. We were waiting. I don't know what we were waiting for. Oh yeah, and people can. Okay, perfect. So we're gonna give people just a couple of minutes and then we're gonna start. Okay. Hi, Evan. They can hear us all. So it's a good thing that we didn't say anything bad. Okay, I think we're gonna go ahead. It's 6:04. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today in our, I think this is the third year that we do the identity panel, Who Am I? I am very thankful to have a great panel of students, faculty, and staff who will reflect on what it means to be Latinx Hispanic. We hope that you also engage in conversation through the Q&A option. And again, this is their stories, this is their own narrative. So ask the questions that you want to ask them, right? I mean, I think that they're going to be they have agreed to be authentic and to be willing to tell you a little bit about what it means to them to be identify as Latinx or Hispanic or whatever is it that they identify as. We also have a great moderator today, so I'm going to hand it over to Oscar Miranda, who is the Assistant Director of Access and Student Support here at Elon, who is going to help moderate the panel. So again, I'll be monitoring the chat and Q&A. Um, go ahead and ask questions. Oscar?
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Sylvia. It's an honor to be a part of this panel and to help moderate it. Thank you all to all our panelists for being a part of this. It's amazing. I was a student myself and to now be on the other side as a staff member, I'm really looking forward to the conversations that we hope to have today. So, little bit about me. I do work at Elon. I'm in the Center for Access and Success, and I help support our first generation college students. Yay them. So let's get started. The Latinx and Hispanic individuals in the United States describe their identity in many ways, oftentimes reflecting the diversity of their origins in their communities, the immigrant experience, and geography. Broadly, some individuals use pan-ethnic terms such as Hispanic or Latino to describe their identity. Some prefer their family's Hispanic origin group, while others prefer to use American. Previous Hispanic Trend Project surveys have found that most Latinos have used all of these at some point to describe themselves. Identifying as Hispanic or Latino or Latina or even Latinx comes with perceived ups and downs. But perhaps breaking down what these terms mean and how they're used within this diverse community can help shed some light on our experience. And this is why we're all here. I want to acknowledge that it's important to know Latinx and Hispanic people are not a monolithic culture. We come from different backgrounds in all shapes and sizes, complexions, and with a multitude of other identities. Today's panel will allow us to get to know a few of our very own self-identified Latinx and Hispanic students, faculty, and staff at Elon. Before we begin, I want to emphasize that they do not represent a whole community and that they are only here to talk about their own experience and to share their own narrative. So without further ado, let's turn it away to our panel. And again, like Sylvie said, please, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We will make sure to field those and take those. So let's get started. Let's start off with some introductions. Panelists, could you please state your name, your major, or your role on campus and how you identify, say Latinx, Latino, Latina, Hispanic, Afro-Latinx, or maybe by your country of origin. Please, would someone like to start?
I'm happy to start. So, hi everyone, my name is Mackenzie Martinez. I use she, her pronouns. I am a senior double major in anthropology and Spanish with a minor in women's gender and sexuality studies. And how I identify changes, I think, by the space that I'm in, but typically I like to say Chicana.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
Oh, I'm happy to go. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna. I am a senior and I'm majoring in sociology with minors in IGS and art. And I identify myself as, it also changes, and it like recently, I just learned this when I got here to Elon's to start identifying myself, which is weird to put yourself in a box. But I guess I'm Latina and I'm from Ecuador, which is a really big part of me. So yeah.
Hi, I'm East. I'm a sophomore. I'm also an Odyssey scholar. I am undetermined right now. I'm undetermined right now, but I know my minors are going to be in literature and art. That's what I know so far. I do identify now, since I met Sylvia and Kia over the summer when I first got to Elon. That's when I started actually learning about Latinx and the different terminology. So now I do identify as Latinx because at one point it was my first language, but then we ended up just like putting me straight into school and I dropped it completely. I mean, I can understand everything y'all say, but it's more of a shy thing for me to speak it. But yeah, that's me.
I can go next. Good evening, everyone. My name is Luis. Here on campus, I'm the director of the Gender and LGBTQIA Center. I really appreciated Oscar's intro, just talking about like how Latinx people identify, Latinx and Hispanic people identify. I think for a while, I would always kind of say like, I'm Latinx. But really since the summer and thinking about like the construction of Latinidad and how it's anti-Black and anti-Indigenous, I really try to move away from Latinx. And so I'm starting to identify more by my country of origin ancestrally. So I was born here in America, but my family's from Mexico. And so I think in this space at this moment, I'll say, hi, my name is Luis and I am Mexican.
So I'll go last. My name is Nina Namaste. I am a professor in world languages and cultures. My identity has moved and shifted along the years, but I probably most closely identified with kind of country of origin. My parents were very proud Catalan. So they were from Catalonia in Spain. They were not Spaniards, they were Catalans and Catalanes. And so I grew up really kind of associating with Catalan culture. Though I also had an interesting, like, growing up because of the mere fact that I grew up in a community called the Spanish Association of the Midwest in Chicago. And it was this really interesting just association of anybody who was of Spanish speaking origin, like super widely, right? So there were Spaniards, there were people from all sorts of places. And so I had very bifurcated identity of, like, I was very like American, United States and Anglo with school, and very kind of Spanish, but all representations of Spanishness at home and in kind of social life. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing. You know, we've had a chance to hear some of our panelists share their identities, how they identify, or maybe how they don't identify. We've heard, you know, Latina, I've heard Mexican, I've heard some people mention their place of origin as well, or maybe their family's origin also. So to help put this into perspective for some of our audience, you know, while we can search up some of these identities and terms on Google, could you please all share in your own words why you identify the way you do, and what does it mean to be Latinx or Hispanic, or even a part of this community to you?
For me, no, when I do talk to people, normally I just say I'm Puerto Rican and Black because I am. um, I actually am so many more things because Puerto Rican is just that, literally. But I mean, I feel like I took up the term Latinx only because that's not my first language anymore, per se, at least in my opinion. So that's how I took on Latinx. However, if you do meet me anywhere on campus, you will know, like, sometimes I'll have an accent, sometimes I won't have an accent. It just depends on, like, I don't know, like when I'm just talking, you know? But that's just how I identify. And if you ask me what I am, I'll be like, I'm Puerto Rican. Like, that's just that. Because Puerto Rican is white, Black, everything, to be honest. So that's how I came to figure out, like, who I was. And then we're from New York, so it's like a whole mix of everything, really. And I love it. I love having, like, a bit of everything and learning more about, like, who I actually am, which I don't know everything, but every year, every day, I learn something new, you know? So that's how I came to figure out, you know, who I am.
For me, I picked Chicana, I think very, very recently. I think since I've been to college, I kind of did, as Oscar mentioned, the whole like Google thing, like, what is the difference? What are the nuances? Because to me, like identifying yourself as something really important. That's a way that you claim your history, you claim your identity and your ancestry. So for me, like finding the right word was really, really important. And so I fell into like Chicanismo, so this kind of Chicano movement that started, I think, in the 60s with like farm laborers' rights, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and I really loved that kind of like social justice, like taking power back that movement represented. And it also really links to this Mexican Americanness that has very much identified my Latinx experience. So like Luis, my family is from Mexico, but I'm third generation born in the US, but fourth to live in the US. So for us, our Mexican ancestry is pretty far back, and we're very Mexican American in our representation, because obviously like there was a lot of things happened with my family assimilated for a generation or so, and so I'm kind of the generation now that's trying to bring it back and reclaim parts of the identity that we lost. So for me, Chicana really speaks to that, like multiple spaces that I feel like I occupy, like Latina, so like I'm not quite white, but then also when I'm in the white spaces, I'm not like super Latino for what they think is Latino. So Chicana is the right blend, I found.
For me, I guess I had never questioned my identity before I got to college. Everyone at my high school looked exactly the same as me. And it's funny because my freshman year, my friends would be like, yeah, us white people. And I was like, yeah, us white people. And then I was like, wait, I'm not white. Like, what am I? Because Latino is not a race, despite it being checked in as a race. And it's not an ethnicity altogether, because ethnicity implies a cultural background, and we all have very different cultural backgrounds. And even inside of Ecuador, there's like so many different cultures and languages even. So it's like, it's been such a quest for me to try to identify myself with. And often I think about, like, am I trying to put myself in a bigger box just so that others understand me better, like just to make it easier for them? And also, what am I? Like, is it defined by the color of my skin? Because I'm kind of like tan, but not really. And you can tell my accent. Like, I've had people ask me in my first sentence, like, where are you from? I'm like, well, thanks. So I guess for me, being Latina, I'm so proud of it, because I do feel a real connection with everyone who's Latino. And like, I feel like that salsa, that like sazon that we all share is really there. and I guess the language, and even I've talked to other friends from other places like Nicaragua, and they've been raised exactly the same way as I have, with like my mother telling me to wear a sweater, and like, we've all shared this similar upbringing, and yet we're all so different. But I don't really know what I am, and I think it matters in the sense of like finding yourself, but not really in telling other people what you are, because why? Like, why would you have to make it easier for them to understand who you are, if that makes sense?
I was going to say, for me, I exist in a space of both being part of the Latinx community, but also being queer. And so for me, my identity shifts, and I'm okay with that because my queerness also shifts. And so part of like how I conceptualize my own identity is that it's in flux. There's nothing that's stagnant. And so for me, I don't know how I identify always, but that's okay, because also being queer, I don't always know what that means, and that's also okay too. Gloria Anzaldúa talks about this kind of like really interesting spot of just kind of, I don't even know, for me, how I interpret it is like this kind of spot at the intersection where you can just kind of make it your own. Now, Anzaldúa is problematic herself sometimes, especially just anti-Indigenous and anti-Black again, but like I really have taken to that concept of like, what is this like queer Latinx space? I don't know what it is. I know it's there and I can enter it and I'm in it, but I don't always know how to define it, and that's okay.
So I grew up in a really privileged household in that my parents fled Spain under the dictatorship. So they were very, very explicit and intentional in our family about that because we lived in the United States, we got to choose and pick the best aspects of culture, right? And that we were going to intentionally be bicultural, but that we were going to leave aside the terrible Spanish aspects that they did not want to reproduce, and that we also had the ability to choose and to be very critical about the US kind of cultural values that we wanted to choose. So again, that was a really privileged, in retrospect, it was very privileged because my parents taught us language, multiple languages, all these kinds of things to allow us choice, right? To allow us choice, to be able to choose. And we were very much encouraged to be different, that it was okay to be different. And it was okay, like you said, Luis, to be in that in-betweenness. But the in-betweenness was actually where the beauty lied, right? That we could navigate and we could bridge and we could go in and out of different cultures. So I never actually really identified as a particular group, right? I never identified, say for instance, I never identified as Hispanic because the term always seemed so problematic to me, right? I get into these raging debates about, the term Hispanic. I was like, well, how about the role of colonialization and imperialism and, like all this oppression and, and it's a made up term and, all these kinds of things, right? So again, it was for me to a little bit to address the comment that's in there is that for me, it was never a question of wanting to identify. I never wanted a term. The terms always seemed limiting to me because I always wanted to be in a space that was in between, because the space in between allowed choice, right? And to be very intentional about being very intentional and explicit about like, this is my Spanish side that I'm coming in with. This is my Catalan side that's coming in from family, right? So that kind of thing.
Yeah, and thank you all so much. We definitely have to unpack this. A lot of good stuff in here. And there was the question that came into the chat, and I want to make sure that we don't miss it while we're on this topic. And it says, why, in parentheses, do you think it is important to define your identity or identities? And does it, or do they change when you change depending on where you are? And then it says geographically. Does someone want to answer this?
So I experienced this a little bit. I was studying abroad in the spring during the COVID semester in Argentina. And for those that don't know, Argentina is in a really interesting place in Latin America where it has had the most European immigration of any Latinx Hispanic country. So I think actually it's about 95% European descent. It also, has had a lot of genocide, much like the US. The indigenous population has really been decimated. So that was a really interesting space for me identity-wise, because here I was going to Argentina like, oh man, there's going to be all these Latinos. We're going to have this kind of like camaraderie in a way. And getting there, I was still one of the darkest people. So that was really interesting too, because when I would meet people, obviously people were nothing but kind to me, but they would ask like, oh, like you're from the US, but like, where's your family? Like they knew there was like something, and I think that's a question that we all get, they're like, where are you from? But I find it comes very differently from Latinos. I think in a lot of ways it comes from a place of seeking connection. But in that case, when I was there, I wasn't saying I was Chicana because I don't think anyone outside the US really knows that term. Even within my house, we joke, we call ourselves Jewish Mexicans. We make it like Jexicans. Like, I don't throw that around like common spaces. It's mostly like when I'm texting my sister or something. So, you kind of go from like the smallest, most niche identity to like the more US context. So then when I was in Argentina, I found myself saying, oh, I'm Mexican. And then, depending on if I was just like at a restaurant ordering or if I was like having coffee with someone, it would lead to a lot more explanation. But I found that I kind of had to reevaluate my identity and how other people were perceiving me in this new political context.
Similar to Mackenzie, I think part of my experience has been like, I get defined by other people. I remember last year when I was in Spain, and people knew automatically I spoke like Mexican Spanish. And so they're like, I know exactly who you are, like where you're from. But then it was interesting because then I felt like I had to tell them I was American too, and specifically like being from Chicago. And I don't know why that was really important for me, but I was like, I'm Mexican ancestry and I'm also American, like, don't like box me in. But I think it's also in how we talk, can get identified as well. So similar to what Mackenzie was saying.
Awesome. And there was another question here. I know we're talking about like living in different places and having to sometimes feel like we have to identify in a certain way. And so another question that has come in, it reads, how do you see yourself as a Latinx living in a place like Alamance County, especially in these Trump times?
I would love to answer that because last week, my friends and I, we really wanted to do something cultural, and we went to Graham, and there was a family waving around the Confederate flag, and I felt genuinely scared to even like speak because I knew that if I spoke with an accent, like I felt in danger, and I kind of felt protected by my white friends, which seems like a really strange concept. And whenever like I ride in the car and it's like just Latinos or Black friends, we're like, if we get pulled over, we're screwed. Like we're just minorities. Whereas if I'm like riding with my white friends, I'm like, okay, I'm cool, I'm chill. And I remember Sylvia like warning us the first week of class, like, you all have to watch out. Like whether you like it or not, this is going to be like different for you, whether you look a little more like American, if you look whiter or not, like you need to take care of yourselves, because if the sheriffs pull you over, if something happens, like you open your mouths and you're still very Latinos, which is like scary to think that we have to guard these parts of our identities to protect our lives. And I've been so privileged throughout my life, and like back at home I live in a very privileged position. But here it's like, suddenly I have the need to hide even these parts of my identity to either fit in or not feel threatened.
For me, I feel like when I'm out and I'm walking around and I'm not talking to anybody, automatically I'm seen as Black. That's the first thing that people think is, oh, she's a light skin, she's Black, which that's bad terminology. But either way, that's how they see me. And that's actually my my advisor. They just wanted to listen, but I didn't know how to put them in it. But when I walk around, because it's the first thing that people see, I'm Black. That's it. When they talk to me, if my accent comes out, which sometimes it does, then they're like, oh, she's like, oh, what are you? Like, then I get the questions and stuff like that. And I feel like living in Alamance, I feel like I'm not scared per se when um, I see like the Trump caravans going around and such. But I can say that it feels intimidating because it feels sometimes like a lot of the students here and a lot of people here in general support it, and that it makes me feel intimidated. I'm not scared, and I've never been scared of anything except for actually this past Friday I experienced something with actually the police, and that made me open my eyes to like I one, I already knew, I can't trust them, like especially now. But when that happened, it was like super eye-opening, like because I've never been attacked in that way on campus, because no one's ever messed with me in such a way like that. They see me and I'm just walking and I go because I'm not bothering anybody. But after that happened, I'm thinking of it like, what can the police do for me if the Trump supporters come through and then I do feel intimidated and then I say something out of line in per se, um, and how are they going to support me, like that. It always goes through my head now. It's just like, how can I even trust them to support me if somebody from the Trump supporters are attacking me, if they're not helping me when I had my encounter with them the past weekend, so that's how I feel. Is just they first see me as Black and that's it, because of my skin, until I start talking, and then they're like, oh, okay, like I can tell this person is probably something else in them. So, oh, let me ask, like, oh, like, what are you? Like, I get that question a lot, and it's only when I talk. So,
I'm so sorry, East. This is definitely not easy. And, there are many challenges that, our communities are having to face in the United States today, especially around the political climate that's been going on. And so I think this would be a good segue into our next question is, could we elaborate a little bit some more on what are some of the challenges that our communities facing in the US today? Are they similar to or different than the rest of the United States population?
I'm happy to start again. I think to start, it becomes a very difficult question to answer when we think about this game of like oppression Olympics that gets played a lot in the United States. Like you can only have one cause for one people and that's it. Like if you support Black Lives Matter, that's it. You can't support LGBTQIA folk. You can't support differently abled folk. Like you have your one and that's it. And they're the most oppressed and no one else will ever be oppressed. When obviously, like we've talked about a lot already, identities intersect. There's history and context involved that, depends on location, depends on time. So I think that, Latinx folk are facing a lot of the same problems that, other people in the US are facing right now. Job insecurity with COVID, health problems with COVID. There's a lot of generalizations that can be made about like the Latinx population in the US that I really don't want to make. But I think it's also clear that the border is a huge problem right now that continues to be, as like crises come up, continues to be pushed back because it's just been going on for so long. Like with the hysterectomies that are happening in Irwin right now, that happened, I think, last week, in between the days of I think last week we all kind of marked the days by the crises. So like Ruth Bader Ginsburg died on Friday. Saturday we had the Trump rally. Maybe Wednesday it was the hysterectomies. Like it happened and then it got pushed back with the next crisis. So I think in general that's something a lot of marginalized peoples are suffering from right now, is that no one has the emotional or the physical capacity to be dealing with all of these at once, and we are kind of forced to pick and choose.
I'm going to piggyback on that, Mackenzie, is that I also think one of the biggest problems in the United States, again, that's huge, it's not the biggest problems. One of the problems that happens in the United States is that the term Hispanic or Latino is meant to kind of create like a political block, when in reality there's so much diversity that gets hidden and elided in that, right? So how we're not talking about nuance, about how is it affecting, how's COVID affecting, I don't know, Cuban Americans of a certain generation in Miami, as opposed to, I don't know, another population in Miami. We're not distinguishing and we're not making nuance of that. And I think that is an issue, is that it gets kind of continually pushed, right? It gets conglomerated by this identity that's easy, right, from the outside, from kind of white culture, that's easy to kind of put everybody together, and it hides, right? It really hides, or even in some cases, I think actually like really blankets, right? Like intentionally hides the difference between the different cultural groups, right? And I think that contributes not just to fatigue of all the different types of intersecting layers of oppression, but it also right, it creates also kind of difficulties in between, right? Because like, why aren't you supporting the larger cause when you're, we should be supporting, all these kind of conflicts that arise from that.
Going off of that, Nina, the generalizations, like I'm an international student, and that aspect of the country, when 2 weeks before school started, Trump was like, okay, if your school is online, you can't be here. And I had this full-blown panic attack of like, the country where I pay taxes, where I pay a very high tuition, where I do everything right, doesn't want me there. And it's not just like this orange man, it's half of this country. And it feels so like this pressure is so intense of like, we don't want you here, and it's so hard. And as for the future, like I have an OPT as part of my visa. That means that 1 year after I graduate, I can stay here and work, and then possibly get an extended visa. And I'm not even sure that I can get that after I graduate. And if that will change, and like this OPT has a $400 fee, and it's like not an easy process, and yet like I will be a college graduate that still has the hardest time, and I can't imagine how hard it must be for people who are not in my situation, who can't, there's no line to stand in, people are like, get in line. There is no line to stand in, and like even doing things the right way is extremely hard, and it feels like this country doesn't want you, and yet like there's so many that people who are Latinos who speak Spanish, like if you go to so many places, you can speak Spanish and I'll be fine. So I don't know, I think there's all these contradictions and polarizations in this country right now, and it's a little scary for the future.
I would say a challenge, and someone talked about assimilation before. I think assimilation is a challenge for the Latinx community. And when I think about, I think it was like 22% of Latinx people voted Republican in like the 2016 election. That's when I really started thinking about how we are assimilating in a way that goes against like the interests and issues against like our communities. And I'm really fearful of Latinx people across all races being assimilated to whiteness historically in this country, like Irish Americans, Italian Americans, who like at one time, Polish Americans, who at one time were very like ridiculed. And then this country was like, oh, hey, if you turn against these people, we'll give you like all the benefits of whiteness. And I'm really scared that that can happen to our community. And I think the statistics are there. And so it'll be really interesting to see in 2020 if that pattern kind of stays the same, or if it levels out, or what happens. So I would say like assimilation into whiteness is probably like a challenge, because we, in a very general sense, Latinx people are seeking that like validation from a country that actively, I don't know if I can swear on this, craps on people.
Thank you, Luis. And you know, this is very real. And I want to touch base on this a little bit some more. I know we have some questions here, but I want to make sure that we don't lose this. Next question. We talked about, you know, cultural assimilation, and you know, we also want to talk about like, how, is it possible to combat this? Is it possible to preserve one's culture, and can we do this at the same time? Is that possible?
Can you ask the question one more time for me, please?
Sure. So we were talking about cultural assimilation, right? And how this is could be a challenge within our communities. And so is it possible to combat this? Is there a way to preserve our own cultural heritage? You know, is it possible to do both at the same time?
Okay, so last night I read it's an essay that is actually made up of like journals and speeches and lectures that a man gave. His name is, his last name is Emerson. However, he wrote this essay that is called Self-Reliance. And in reading that, it's all about one, self-reliance, two, identity and the individual, and three, social and society. And with that being said, in his essay, he talks the whole thing is all about being an individual and not falling for society's standards, which all of what we're talking about is created by society. If I'm being completely honest, which I learned last year in race, gender, and sports. And it's all made up of society, but what he said is that you shouldn't fall for society. You shouldn't, how do I say this? Conform. You shouldn't conform to your society, nor your community, regardless of religion and such things. You should look deep inside of you, and so deep inside of you that it's only your identity at all. So if you do identify with certain parts with religion, or if you don't believe in half of the Bible, you believe in half of it, that's your identity to yourself. And I feel like all people should think like this, and should want to, I feel like they all should want to live that life of, it's me. Nobody else can tell me who I am, because I'm my individual and I know who I am deep down inside. And it just, of course, it's gonna take you so much time to figure out who you really are deep down inside. But I think that it's really important so that we don't fall under those standards, and you know, just sometimes people fall into the standards and completely give up their own culture or their own standards that they used to have. And I don't think that that is something that should happen. And I'm sure you guys don't think that's something that should happen as well. I don't think assimilation is something that should really be, at least for us. But I think that finding yourself in that way, that's how you really identify with all of these different things, and that's how you take in all of these different things, and you learn so much stuff about yourself but about others as well in doing that. So I think everybody should read Self-Reliance by Emerson, by the way. Y'all should read that. It's really long, but it's worth it, I promise.
Thank you so much, East. And we have a couple other questions. We had one earlier, and so I want to make sure that it gets answered. In what ways do you believe our identity plays with and in our professional future? Do you believe we are able to truly embody our identity of Hispanic or whatever you coin in that future? This is from one of our audience.
I think it goes a little bit back to like what East was saying, is that, you know, we should be ideally moving towards a society where people don't have to compromise part of their identity to fit into the larger society. So yeah, like I say, be Latinx, be proud, and you know, if you're in a field, I mean, I'm trying to think like, um, you know, if we're looking at like universities, right? And if we're looking at Elon, if we can critique Elon a little bit, right? If we look at the faculty, I think the majority of faculty that are Latinx are in the world language department teaching Spanish. So what does that say about how we're valuing staff and how the educational system up until that point for those faculty members has been pushing them towards this one field? But you know, I think, where was I going with that? You know, they're still here, there's still a presence on campus, and you know, they're Latino and proud. And I think this time right now, we're doing a lot of pushing towards more acceptance of that, and towards putting people, like Nina was saying, like not putting them in blocks, like putting them in boxes so much anymore. Like Latinx people can only do X, Y, and Z jobs. Like, no, we can all do the jobs that we're qualified for.
Yeah, and you know, talking about the professional, how our identity sometimes infiltrates our professional lives. You know, I think back to, for example, DACA recipients, right, that are having to live. Used to be every 2 years they would have to renew to get their work authorization, right, to be able to work here in the United States legally. But now they've changed policies, and so now every year DACA recipients have to reapply. And these are, you know, they have to file fees. I believe it's like $495 for every application. And so it used to be 2 years that you would just have to fill that out. Now you're having to do it every year. And, you know, with the court cases and everything that's been going on, whether or not it's going to stay, it's just kind of been in limbo. So something I wanted to highlight as well. So Mackenzie was talking about, you know, the identities and you know, Elon. So let's bring it back down to our campus. Has Elon helped you all embrace your Latinx or Hispanic identity, or the other identities you hold, and why or why not?
For me, it absolutely has. I think when I came to Elon, one of the things that brought me here was El Centro. I remember Kristen Aquilina, if y'all know her, love her. She was like, we have this place where Latinos hang out. And I was like, okay, amazing. And when I came here, I honestly felt like I had like this tiny family where I could rely on, even if I didn't know them that well. And with like working at a center, I feel like you always have to put in a little work to figure out who you are. So I've been to intersect into these panels and so many things that have helped me embrace and love who I am, and as well like understand it, because I didn't even know what I was, and I didn't even know how I had to speak about myself, or how I had to speak about race or identity, or like what it even meant to be Latina. So I think Elon does a great job if you look for it, if you seek that discomfort, if you seek those spaces that exist in many places where these discussions happen. So I think it has helped me.
You can go ahead.
Go ahead, East.
Thank you. I can say that at Elon, I with like my first classes that I took in my freshman year, all of my classes were all based around like inclusivity for the most part. So that was always like topic of discussion, even outside of class. I would see them in the street and stuff, and we'll just talk about it right there, like just have conversations about it. And I feel like that made me look a lot more into like who I am and accepting who I am and like adding all of these different parts of my identity to myself, because we always had those conversations, whether we're talking about global warming or anything. Like we always had that part where my teachers were like really like they're really open to inclusivity. Like that is super important to them. Like Dr. Janet Warman, which she actually retired last year, and I miss her so much. And Dr. Pine as well. All, they all practiced that in our classes, and they wanted us all, including anybody that's not colored, anybody that is colored, they wanted us to all be there for each other and like form those bonds regardless of how different you are from anybody. And we literally every day we would get into the class, you introduce yourself to somebody and we switch seats every single time. So you sit with different people all the time and you learn those different people. And I feel like that's really important. And I feel like Elon does a pretty good job, especially with the teachers that are, including that in their curriculum. So I think that so far I've had really good luck with that in my classes and on campus with the random people that I meet here. So on that part, I can say that I feel like it's a pretty good job done here. So.
And I was going to share, so I was interviewed by The Pendulum a couple weeks ago to talk about what it's like to be Hispanic and Latinx. And it was really interesting because I actively chose to talk about the positive things of being Latinx at Elon, because I've only been here for a year. And I think a lot of us are aware of the issues, right? Like we're underrepresented, there's not enough support. CREED, El Centro, Center for Access and Success, GLC, all these places need a bigger budget and more staffing and resources. But for me, at this moment, I'm in such a place of despair that choosing to actively stay in joy is an act of resistance. And so when I talked about, Elon, in terms of my Latinx identity, I talked about how places like the CREED, El Centro, Arazu, like these are places that I'm actually choosing to actively step into to remind myself that like I'm accepted, like I'm validated in my identity. And shout out to like Sylvia, right? Like for probably so many Latinx faculty and staff, Sylvia is like one of the first people we meet, and that was the case for me too. And so, for Elon is a historically white institution. There's not that many of us, but the fact that a place like El Centro is here, CREED's here, Arazu's here, I'm like, that's really special. And so I don't want to take away from the not good parts of what it means to be Latinx at Elon, but in these, again, times of such despair, like centering joy is super critical.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing. We have a couple questions here from the audience. Someone anonymous said, do you think Filipinos should be considered Hispanic?
I want to talk on this first. The reason why I want to talk on this is because at first, I've had Filipino friends before, and we've had the conversation of what is our background. Oh, I'm sorry, the train is coming by. Give me 1 second.
Now it's passing me.
Okay, it's gone. Okay, now it's gone. But okay, maybe it's not.
We can still hear you.
Good. But okay, so with those friends that I've had in the past, in our classes, we've talked about, like in my geography class before, I've talked with my teacher and everybody in the classroom about, you know, how in Asia, you know, how they created like that Filipino, oh wait, um, okay, how Filipinos were created, right? And she also, this is in high school when I'm talking about this is my senior year, and she's the best teacher ever. But she's always been that person to be inclusive of everyone and wanting to learn more about each other. So we did have this lesson on that because we were learning about that area. And my friends and we would talk about it, and they would say like, yeah, I agree as well that, you know, like that is my background, and I'm not sure why it's not included in it. And I said the same thing because I didn't know why it wasn't included in either. And I've talked to my mother about it before too, as to why, you know, they are Hispanic, but they're mixed as well, and all of us are mixed. So it didn't really make sense to me ever, like, why aren't they included if they're, you know, they're Asian and they're Spaniard or Hispanic, or whatever it may be in their mix of their culture at least. But that always crossed my mind. It still does sometimes. I just think about it like, how come they're not, you know, included in us as well? I don't know. I always saw it as it's kind of unfair that they're not, but at the same time, if it's really up to them if they want to be included in that. If they have that knowledge and they want to be a part of the Hispanic group, then I think so be it. I think that they should. They are, in my opinion, and I'm not, you know, I'm not sure how correct that is, if they are or not, but I really do think that they should be included. So.
Thank you so much, East. And also to help address this question in the chat, I believe Luis dropped down a book, title to a book, I believe, or a link that might help answer this question as well. And so we're getting close to our time here, but I wanted to ask one final question. If we could just kind of go around to our panelists, our identities are complex, and there's some things that we just are still figuring out. There's some questions that we don't have answers to as well. And so, keeping and remembering that, we can only speak to our own experiences. What is something that you all would want others to know about your identity?
I think just not making assumptions is super important. Whether that's assuming someone is Hispanic, assuming that they're not Hispanic, assuming that they even like the word Hispanic, maybe that they speak Spanish or that their families are immigrant. Like, there's just so many stereotypes, I think, that go along with the Latinx community, and just working to, it's kind of the theme of the year, right? With the common read bias, just working to kind of like be aware of that and consciously correct yourself of that. And not be so caught up in like, oh, but like, what are you? I think that question too, no one should stop asking, where are you from? That's a question that we should be done with.
Would someone else like to add?
I guess I would like people to know that it's okay to ask questions, but it's not okay to expect another person to educate them on everything. There's Google where you can find very basic things, and just like be mindful of how you approach other people who are different than you. I love it when my friends ask me like about my culture with a genuine interest. Like, how we're different and how we're similar. But that, like, you know, questioning that often happens with the like Spanish classes interviews where they ask you 30 minutes of questions and never speak to you again. I guess just like see us as individuals. I would love for people to like see me as like this full person who is, I'm like an artist and a musician and like a sociologist and Latina, and like it's just part of the package. But I don't feel like it should be my front page of the book, even if I have like the really dark hair and the really dark eyebrows. Just like be mindful of how you approach people and how, and like be educated on it. And if you're not, learn to sit in silence and be comfortable with that.
Thank you so much. And so we have another question coming in. How do you all feel about the argument the term Latino is already gender neutral, and that we shouldn't use the term Latinx? I've heard many people say that we're trying to change the language and that it's not necessary. Any thoughts on that?
I'm gonna jump in. Just
yeah.
like Sylvia's also like, I'm like trying, and I'm gonna channel Sylvia here. I don't know that you could ever say that anything in Spanish is gender neutral. Spanish is an inherently gendered language because it was made that way, right? I mean, it was constructed to be a gendered language. And so I think that, yeah, I don't think there is a neutral term. There are no neutral terms unless there are actively people who are actively working to make terms without a gender. And I'm talking about, you know, like for instance, in English, the distinction between actor and actress, that people are using on purpose actor to be all inclusive for both male and female, right? Because there shouldn't be some sort of distinction, right, between that career. And in Spanish, they are trying to do those kinds of things as well. They're trying to make more, right? There are some movements trying to make things more inclusive. But Latinx, the X is actually really difficult in Spanish, right? Like linguistically, like Latin X. I mean, like it's just a different, like that's a difficult one. So it's not quite it's like the SP, like the ST, you know, that is so difficult, right? So I'm not sure that, you know, we're going to have to, the language evolves and constantly moves. And so I think that we're going to have to be consciously aware of how to intentionally make language more inclusive, but we're not going to make Spanish neutral ever, because it is always masculine and feminine.
Perfect. So this pretty much, you know, concludes our session. Thank you all so much to our panelists being here today, our audience members. Thank you all so much for the questions. You know, your presence here as well. It's greatly appreciated. I see some comments coming in from different people saying, you know, thank you all so much for the stories, the honesty, the hope. You all are so insightful and inspiring. Someone else said, wow, these answers give me hope. And I think that's very important, right? Especially, you know, in these times. So, you know, I'd just like to turn it back to Sylvia. Thank you all so much.
You really didn't have to turn it back to me, but again, thank you so much to the panelists. It was great to have you. This is probably one of my favorite events for Hispanic Heritage Month, because I think that we all learn a lot about what it is to be Latinx. It comes in different ways for each of us, and we live it in a different way. So I'm always thankful for your stories, for sharing your stories with us. So appreciate also the attendees for being with us, and for all the questions, and for always supporting the Latinx community. So I hope you all have a great evening, and as they say, just come and ask questions, come and meet the Latinx people, come to El Centro, come to the Creed, and learn a little bit about what it means for each of them, or for each of us, this amazing and rich identity. So thank you all. Have a good night.